Hello everyone and welcome to another News Coolum video. In this video I'm going to be reviewing the all-new Kia Niro EV. Kia was kind enough to lend this car to me for a week for a full review, so I'm going to go over what it's like to live with this car for a week, and along the way I'm going to talk about a lot of the quirks and little features that you might not know about, show how this car actually works in the real world and what it's like as an EV owner, how it handles traveling, how it handles the public charging infrastructure, and just how it handles itself in general as a car. So stick around. So before I get started, a bit of a disclaimer. Kia loaned me the Niro EV to review for a week with no instructions and no requirements. They provided no input on this review, and they will see it for the first time when it is published on my channel, just the same as everyone else. One of the first quirks I encountered with the Niro EV is that I wasn't able to turn the car on fully when it was still plugged in and charging. And when it's in that half-on state, you can no longer unplug from the charger. You actually have to power the car down completely before you can unplug. And this might be an issue specifically with the car I was testing. However, I couldn't power down from that half-on state if my foot was on the brake pedal. And that seems odd because the brake pedal is a natural place to put your foot when you're powering a car on or off. Now, I think I know why Kia did this. They don't want people putting the car into gear while it's still plugged in and charging. However, I think other automakers have already come up with a more elegant solution. Simply don't let the car go into gear. Speaking of gears, Kia decided to go with a turn knob for the Niro EV's gear selector. Turn once to the right to put it into drive, turn once to the left to put it into reverse, and press the P button in the center to put it into park. I didn't actually like this configuration. I didn't think it was ergonomic, and it was a pain to use when doing three-point turns. I would prefer to have a standard style gear shifter or button selectors for the gears. One thing I missed almost immediately were keyless entry buttons on the rear door handles. The Niro EV has them for the front doors and the hatch, but not the rear doors. It seems like such a small thing to have a couple of buttons on the rear doors, but the Niro EV is missing them. Another thing that I missed almost immediately was the lack of true one-pedal driving. Vehicles with one-pedal driving allow you to do almost all of your daily driving without ever touching the brake pedal. The Niro EV's regenerative braking is very strong and it will decelerate very quickly. However, it won't bring the vehicle to a complete stop. Now, the Niro EV does have two regenerative braking paddles, one on either side of the steering wheel. The one on the left will toggle the regenerative braking higher, the one on the right will toggle it lower. And the paddle on the left side of the steering wheel will bring the Niro EV to a complete stop if you hold it back. And when you do that, it will actually shut off creep, so you can release the paddle and the Niro EV will not creep forward like a normal car. This lack of one-pedal driving also has another side effect. The Niro EV's braking below 5 to 10 miles an hour is very harsh and very unpredictable, and it doesn't slow the vehicle consistently. This leads to a very poor driving experience, and it is something I would like to see Kia improve. Another thing that I noticed is that the Niro EV was taking much longer to recharge to full on the level 2 AC charging that I use at my office. And this makes sense because the Niro EV's battery is listed as 64 kilowatt hours of usable battery capacity. That's 4 kilowatt hours more than my Volt EV. That 4 kilowatt hour difference, however, doesn't account for the 1.5 to 2 hours more time it appeared that the Niro EV was taking to recharge compared to my Bolt EV. I made sure to drive the Niro EV on a lot of common routes where I am familiar with the efficiency that I see in other vehicles. And one thing that I did note was that the Niro EV in this city driving was seeing about 5 to 10% worse efficiency than the Bolt EV. That also aligns with the EPA's rating of a 239-mile range for the Niro EV, despite having that larger battery capacity. One explanation for the lower city efficiency is that the Niro EV is a heavier vehicle. It's several hundred pounds heavier than the Bolt EV and a couple hundred pounds heavier than the Hyundai Kona Electric. However, I don't think that that fully explains the difference in efficiency. What I believe is one of the primary culprits is that the Niro EV uses Michelin MXM4 tires that are neither true touring tires nor true low rolling resistance tires. And Kia recommends only inflating the MXM4 tires to 36 psi sidewall pressure. In my experience with the MXM4s, that is far too low. And in order to see true low rolling resistance numbers out of them, they need to be inflated to at least 44 to 46 psi. Tesla also uses the Michelin MXM4s on their Model 3s, but they advise their owners to actually inflate to much higher inflation levels than Kia does. I think a really easy way for Niro EV owners to improve the around town efficiency of their vehicles would be to inflate their tires to a little bit higher than what's rated stock, at least 40 to 42 psi, and my guess is you'd see nearly a 5% efficiency increase just in regular city driving. The good thing is that rolling resistance doesn't really affect the numbers for higher speed driving, which I'll get into later. For those of you who follow my channel, you'll know that I have also done a parallel drive between my Bolt EV and David's Hyundai Kona Electric. And I promised David that I'd let him check out the Niro EV when I got it for review. So I decided to make a special trip out just to hang out and do a side-by-side with the Niro EV and the Kona Electric. On the way driving out, the Niro EV did pop up an interesting warning that I've never seen before. It was advising me to take a break after a couple hours of driving without stopping. While I did find the warning a bit funny, it is a good reminder that with this new generation of longer range electric vehicles, it really is the driver that is becoming the limiting factor. These vehicles will allow you to drive for hours even at freeway speeds, and it will get to a point where the driver is actually in need of a break by the time the car actually needs to stop to be recharged. The trip out to see David and his Kona Electric also gave me the chance to test out some of the Niro EV's driver assist features. This Niro EV came equipped with both an adaptive cruise control with a setting that allowed you to determine how many car lengths you were following the vehicle in front of you. And in addition, it also came with lane keep assist and a blind spot warning system. The blind spot warning will trigger a light in the side view mirrors if someone is in the other lane. But if you turn on the turn signal, it will also provide an audible warning letting you know that there is a vehicle that you might possibly collide with. Overall, I like the adaptive cruise control. However, there were things that I did not like about it. It would brake very suddenly if someone in another lane was either braking or exiting the freeway and braking on the on-ramp. And sometimes it didn't brake soon enough. As a driver, I try to watch several cars ahead, and when I see a slowdown occurring, I tend to slow down even if the car immediately in front of me has not already started slowing down. Another thing that seems odd is I'm used to being able to tap the regenerative braking paddle and shut off cruise control. In the Niro EV, it simply doesn't allow you to do that. You tap the regenerative braking paddle and it tells you that that feature is not available. However, it does not shut down cruise control in the same way that it would if you pressed the brake pedal. The lane keep assist is something that I wasn't as happy with. I wouldn't normally use it. I did turn it on occasionally, especially when it was getting late and I was tired and driving. That being said, I do have some concerns with it. One is as you're passing an off-ramp on the freeway, the steering wheel will occasionally jerk to the right. Now, if I didn't have a good handle on the steering wheel, I wonder whether the Niro EV might not steer itself off the freeway and onto the on-ramp. The other thing is I tend to be fairly light on the steering wheel, and even when gripping the steering wheel, the Niro EV would indicate to me that I needed to keep my hands on the steering wheel. And finally, the Niro EV's lane keep assist. I don't think it liked my lines very much, and I certainly didn't like the lines that it would take around turns and corners. I would often provide feedback that it wouldn't want to accept, even on a sweeping curve it would try to pull me in one direction or another. So overall, the lane keep assist I think is a great safety feature, but as it's currently implemented, I would rarely use it in my regular driving. By the weekend, I was ready to make my regular 1,000-mile trip up to Northern California, and this was going to be a good chance for me to test just how well the Niro EV would handle road tripping. By the time I was ready to leave the office, however, the battery was only 80%. This goes back to the Niro EV having a much larger battery than I'm used to, and so I ended up leaving with less than a full battery when I would typically be leaving with a full battery in the Bolt EV. This meant that I actually had to stop a little bit earlier than I normally would. I ended up stopping in Delano, California for a few minutes to charge up and take advantage of the last bit of sunlight hitting the solar panels. The first EVgo charger was only charging at 100 amps, so it was less than a 40 kilowatt rate. And again, with lower charging speeds, the Niro EV actually is at a disadvantage. I moved to the next charger that was charging at the full 125 amps, but again, I only needed to spend about 15 to 20 minutes there to get enough range to go to my typical dinner stop. I usually like to stop at the Spike and Rail in Selma, just south of Fresno, for dinner. It works out in terms of timing. Again, these are only 125 amp chargers, so they can't put out more than about 50 kilowatts. But because this is a dinner stop, I'm typically stopped for about 45 minutes to an hour anyway. And this is where the Niro EV really shines. By having a larger battery, you can take advantage of that 45 to 50-minute dinner stop a little bit more effectively than you can in something like the Bolt EV. This is also due to the fact that the Niro EV will actually sustain the max charge rate from that charger for a longer period of time. So by the time you're done with a 45-minute stop, you'll have a little bit extra energy, which more than compensates for any differences you might see in efficiency. By charging up to over 80% in Selma, I was able to push my next stop out a little bit farther than I normally do. So I ended up making my next stop in Galt, California, just south of Sacramento. Now, an important thing to note here, though, is my total charging time up to this point in the Niro EV was very similar to the amount of time I would typically spend charging in the Bolt EV. And that's because most of the public fast chargers are still only 50 kilowatts. And a vehicle like the Niro EV will only really start to shine when faster DC chargers come online. But I made it a point to stop and use Electrify America's new 350 kilowatt charger in Dunnigan off of Interstate 5. I charged up much longer than I needed to, but I did want to see a couple of things. First, its charge rate, which is nearly identical to the charging rate for David's Hyundai Kona Electric. It peaked at 75 kilowatts. The Niro EV will actually lose some of its charge rate, most likely due to battery conditioning. So while it peaked at 75 kilowatts, there was a period of time where it was charging a little bit under 70 kilowatts. The other thing I wanted to note was because it's charging at a faster rate and Electrify America is using a time-based fee schedule, I wanted to see how it compared to some of the slower charging vehicles. Now, the Niro EV won't be as cheap to charge on an Electrify America station as an EV that can charge at the full 150 kilowatts or more. However, due to the Niro EV's faster charging rate, it does see a bit of a discount compared to some of the slower charging electric vehicles that are currently available. The efficiency for this first 500-mile leg was actually very similar to the type of efficiency I see in the Bolt EV. And the improved highway efficiency in the Niro EV relative to what I saw in local driving makes me think that the Niro EV's lower city efficiency has something to do with either the tires or the additional weight. Part of my reason for taking this trip is that I did have some things to transport, and it gave me a good chance to check out the Niro EV's interior, but also its overall cargo capacity. The Niro EV has 53 cubic feet of seat-down cargo capacity, which is only 3 cubic feet less than the Bolt EV. However, I actually found the space to be less usable. I ended up having to put the rolled up mattress for our guest bedroom on the back seat, and the behind the seat cargo area in the Niro EV favors depth and width over height, which I actually found very limiting. The privacy screen rolls back and forth, and if your cargo is too tall, it's actually very difficult to latch into place. Overall, I found the cargo capacity less usable than what I'm used to, though it does have decent enough space. The interior materials are very nice. The seats in the Niro EV are wider than the seats in the Bolt EV or the Kona Electric. The driver's seat is also electronically adjustable, though the passenger side front seat is still mechanically adjusted. The seats do have ventilation and heating, and overall I found them to be fairly comfortable. The rear passenger room is also significantly better than what you'd find in the Kona Electric and on par with the Bolt EV. I found the cabin configuration of the Niro EV to be fairly conservative and very basic. However, that's actually a very good thing. Everything was easy to reach and accessible. The USB ports were easy to access. I do think the infotainment screen needs to be a little bit larger. I did find that the radio buttons on the front of the panel were a little bit unnecessary and redundant, and opening up that space would allow for a slightly larger infotainment screen. The infotainment center is fairly easy to navigate. Android Auto operated just fine through it, and the built-in navigation had directions to nearby chargers. Now, the navigation I think needs to improve because unless you know what chargers are at what address, it doesn't really help you in terms of identifying the chargers or the charger speed. The driver information center likewise is fairly straightforward. I wish it would provide additional information, actual numbers in terms of kilowatts in output and regenerative braking, kilowatt hours used, and other detailed information. But the simplicity actually makes it very unassuming and very easy to use. In fact, I don't think you really need to know anything about an EV at all to understand it. The other interesting thing Kia did is with the battery level. On the infotainment center, under the EV controls, you can see the actual percentage of battery. But when you look at the driver information center, they actually did something funny with the gauge. It's split into thirds, and the bottom third is split one additional time, with the bottom two bars being red, which is a low indicator. One thing that this does is psychologically, by the time it looks like you're halfway through the battery, you've actually used closer to 60 or 70% of the battery, which gives the impression that the Niro EV has a much longer range than it actually does. And by the time you reach that point, you're typically ready to stop anyway. The other thing that it does is, even if you're only charging to 80% battery, it makes the battery appear to be much more full than it actually is. Kia chose a very ominous sounding pedestrian alert, which is a sound generator that lets pedestrians know when you are driving nearby. Now, I personally don't care either way about the sound itself. My concern about this sound is that it seems to disturb animals and agitate them, which can create a dangerous situation. Though the heifers were just a bit irritated, I worried that had there been any bulls nearby, they might have actually attacked the vehicle. By the end of the weekend, I was ready to make the return trip to Southern California. For the southbound trip, I prefer to take Highway 101 heading down through the Bay Area, and this also gives me a chance to stop off at my favorite charging location in Prunedale, the Recargo station with 6 200 kilowatt chargers. This is another great opportunity to show off the Niro EV's faster charging rate. I also made sure to charge up enough that I had the range necessary to veer off from Highway 101 and take the more scenic PCH down through Big Sur into San Luis Obispo. This gave me the chance to really test out the Niro EV's handling while I got to enjoy the sunset over the ocean. The Niro EV is very smooth and very easy to drive, and it handles well enough. However, I don't necessarily find it a very engaging vehicle to drive. It feels more like a touring car and designed for relaxed driving rather than engaging performance driving. The Niro EV does have three performance settings: an eco, a normal, and a sport mode. Now, these settings not only remap how much power is available through the accelerator, it also changes the weight of the steering. I found the steering in eco mode to be a little too light, and I found the steering in sport mode to be too heavy. I found normal to be a much better balance between the two, especially for regular driving. Even with the tighter steering input for sport mode, I didn't find it that engaging to drive. The Niro EV is a heavy vehicle and it doesn't feel very nimble. However, for those who enjoy relaxed driving, I think it does tick off that box. While I was driving the coast roads, I also had a chance to test out the Niro EV's climate control system. An interesting feature that does save energy by focusing all of the air just on the driver. So if you do happen to be driving alone, this is a great way to increase the effectiveness of either the air conditioning or the heater. I had a major issue with the actual heater itself. When it was finally cold enough to warrant using the heater, it took such a long time to start blowing air that was warmer than ambient that I actually just shut it off in frustration. I understand that heat pumps are a more efficient way of heating the cabin of a vehicle. However, the most important thing about a heater in the climate control system is that it effectively heat the cabin, and I did not feel that from the Niro EV's heater. One other quirk I noticed with the climate control system: even when I shut it down completely, it would still blow outside air in through the vents. I actually had to physically shut the vents in order to prevent cold outside air from blowing on me when I had the climate control system shut down completely. The question I will invariably be asked is, would I trade my Bolt EV for the Niro EV? After finishing the review, I was leaning toward yes, I would. However, after getting back into my Bolt EV and driving it again, I realized all of the things that I would miss and all of the things that I would have to sacrifice. And that lean toward a yes turned to an absolute no. Now, this is not a knock on the Niro EV. Kia got a lot right with this car, and I think it's the right fit for a lot of people. I know a number of people who own the Bolt EV and are not satisfied with it, and the Niro EV checks off a lot of those boxes. However, those improvements and features come at a cost. The Niro EV is not a ground up electric vehicle. It's an electric powertrain that was adapted to Kia's existing Niro platform, and you can feel it in the way the car drives and the way the car handles. And overall, it feels almost as though the Niro is unfinished. There are small things that are missing, there are some quirks with how it operates, but that being said, I think that the Niro EV is about as good as you can get from an EV that was not built from the ground up as an EV. To me, it feels as though Kia looked at the top 10 complaints that Bolt EV owners had about their vehicles, and they addressed each and every one of them in the Niro EV. However, when you look at the things that Bolt EV owners love about their car, I feel like Kia was not able to completely address those things in the Niro EV. So, in terms of the question of whether you should buy a Niro EV, I think it really does come down to what you value. I think that it's another key option that's available to prospective EV owners who don't feel like the Bolt EV or the Hyundai Kona Electric or the Tesla Model 3 fit their driving needs or wants. The Niro EV is an essential EV offering that will appeal to a wide audience due to its standard styling, its unintimidating interior, the relaxed driving dynamic. So the Niro EV is another worthy, reasonably priced, no compromise electric vehicle, and that's good enough for me. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel and it helps me test out these new EVs and bring you reviews and updates from the EV world. And thank you for watching.